first thing I want to say is don't get discouraged for those of you who are getting this the first time, because it'll make sense the first time, but then the next day it doesn't make sense, right?
Yep.
Remember that? And then you do it again and you're like, oh yeah, I remember this now. Today we're just going to start with the goal, the overall objective of regulation, and that is, well, like Steve said, get all the parts to function correctly. Going down a little bit deeper than that, you have a balance, you have repetition, which you want to be able to repeat really, really fast. And then countering that is dynamic range or power. So they work against each other. So if you regulate a piano favoring your power or your dynamic range, that is going to be detrimental to your repetition. Or conversely, if you regulate it more towards the repetition side, then you're going to have less dynamic range. Okay. So repetition and power, and then drilling down a little slightly deeper, and this is what I want to focus on, is your aftertouch. So aftertouch is the crucial component of both grand and upright regulation. So aftertouch, what's aftertouch, Victoria?
It's the distance that the key will travel after it lets off.
Good, exactly. So right here, when the hammer comes up, watch the hammer in relation to the string. That right there, that little bump, that's called let off. It's also called escapement. It's really an interchangeable term. And right here, after let off, the key actually can still travel a little bit.
So after it reaches that little threshold, is it just momentum that carries the hammer into the string?
It is, exactly. Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. So you want the right amount of aftertouch, and it's, how much is it, Steve?
25 and 50.
Yeah, between 25 and 50 thousandths. Okay, so what are the three things that affect aftertouch? Let off, dip, and blow. Yes. Nice, Victoria. Okay. So that's emblazoned in your mind forever. All right, that's it. So what is, what's let off, Jared?
That's the point at which the hammer actually falls back before it reaches the string.
Okay, and what's the correct spec on that?
An eighth to a 16th to an eighth.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's blocking right there. So here's a correct let off right there. So you can see up here at the string, it comes in to within an eighth of an inch and then it pulls away. Whereas this one, it never lets off, and that's a really, really ugly sound. And so if you regulate that let off too close and then something changes, then you're going to get blocking. If there's not enough aftertouch, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to change the let off, because that might be the problem, but there are two other factors that you could address. We'll get to that. So this magnet is an eighth of an inch thick. So you just put it on the string, and that tells you when that hammer is an eighth of an inch to the string. And so you adjust according to this. So that magnet sticks on the strings, right? And you don't want it to put pressure on the magnet, because then it's actually not an eighth of an inch. It's actually more like, a 16th or whatever. It's less than an eighth if it's putting pressure on it. But if it just comes in close and just like the fuzzies of the hammer just barely touch it, then you're at an eighth of an inch. Okay. So can you predict? We just went up with the let off button. What did that do to our aftertouch? Do we have more aftertouch or less aftertouch?
Less.
Good. Yeah. How'd you know that so fast?
If it travels farther, that means there's less time for there to be aftertouch, because.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Very logical. Right. there's different thicknesses of dip blocks. This one happens to be 10 millimeters. I think I sanded it down to be exactly 10 millimeters. Okay, so that looks pretty good. That looks pretty even. You can actually change it by depending on how hard you hit it. So if I hit it really hard, now it's going to be way too deep. If I hit it just pianissimo, there's a little bit of a bump up there.
Is that because of the felt?
Yes, exactly. You're compressing that felt. So so you kind of have to learn to do it consistently with like a mezzo forte blow. And there you've got a pretty good dip of that 10 millimeters. Dip is the distance you can depress the key, which is regulated right here. It's really stuck in there. Okay. So you do have these, right? Ivory, you have these. You always want these on top. You don't want to use the
Shapes.
yeah, these little punchings on the top. You always want the felt on top, but you make adjustments by changing the punchings. And each color corresponds to a different thickness. So this one is also pretty obvious. Taylor, what do you think? If I remove these punchings, what's that going to do to aftertouch? Is it going to increase the aftertouch or decrease it?
Would it increase it?
Yeah, increase. Why?
That was just intuition, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because the dip distance is further.
Yeah, exactly. So the point at which let off occurs is still exactly the same, but the key has a longer distance to travel. It has a longer distance by that much.
Does every key generally have the same amount of punchings, or is every key different?
Every key's different. I mean, they're more or less in the same ballpark, but you do have to go one by one and regulate the exact dip on each one. Okay, so we talked about let off, dip, and then what's the third one?
Blow.
Blow. Okay. Do you want to talk about blow?
Yeah, distance the hammer travels. So
Okay.
it's on the upright, it's the distance where the hammer rest rail is.
Okay.
How far back or forward it is.
Good. All right. So you're changing your blow distance doesn't actually give you aftertouch or decrease your aftertouch. But what it does is it creates this right here. That's a movement of the key before the hammer starts to move, which is incorrect. What you want is you want such that the instant that you touch the key, that hammer starts to move. Or like a tiny whisper of a fraction of a second after you hit the key, that hammer starts to move. This right here, that's like a huge amount of lost motion. Yeah. And it's changing the capstan that actually does the work, that actually changes the
Oh.
So if there's lost motion, you need
The
to
aftertouch.
raise the capstan.
Okay.
Okay, so let's
That answers the question I had.
That's fair. So this right here, you see that back check move before the hammer starts to move? That's still too much. Okay. And we don't want to go too high because then we have other pitfalls. Okay, that's pretty good. We go slightly higher probably. Okay, that's good. And let's make sure that it's resting on the rest rail by.
Yeah, because if it's too high, it won't rest on the wrist rail.
Yeah, what'll it rest on?
The capstan.
Not the capstan. Well, so it's the hammer butt that we're talking about. So the hammer assembly, which is the hammer butt, the shank, and the hammer.
Okay.
So it could be resting on one of two things. It could be either resting on the rest rail or
On the jacks?
on the jack. Yeah, right. And that jack needs to freely move in and out like that. Which, if it's resting on the rest rail, that jack will move freely in and out. If it's resting on the jack, like if I pull this back, it's no longer resting on the rest rail. so now it's resting on the jack. Now it doesn't freely move in and out. You see, it just got stuck. So if I push that forward, now the jack's going to snap back. Okay. So if I go back with my rest rail, now the jack is back to the point where it can move freely in and out. But it's just poised exactly under that hammer butt. Okay. So now we have well, there's now way too much aftertouch because we exaggerated that a lot. You could break down these three things that affect your aftertouch, your let off, dip, and blow, into a very simple, it's really kind of two simple areas. It's just this area right here, the front of the key, the dip, the distance you can press the key, or how much food you're giving, how much energy you're introducing in the system, and this space right here, right? It's just those two spaces. So your let off has to do with your let off button, your blow has to do with your jack toe. So your blow and your let off are this location right here. So you have your, let's see, you have your jack, right? It's kind of an L shape, and your let off button is, so your let off changes this, your blow, which necessitates changing the capstan, changes this, right? So those two items are essentially the same thing. It's essentially just the proximity of the jack toe here to the let off button here. So is because there's kind of a sacred, I say sacred sort of tongue in cheek, but there's sort of a sacred order of what we're gonna sacrifice. And that's an order of what the pianist is going to object to, or what's, and so let off, we're going to keep that an 1/8 of an inch at all costs, because that gives you the greatest dynamic range, right? When that let off is coming just right close to the string at that 1/8 of an inch point right there, that's going to give the pianist maximum dynamic range. Okay, so that's the last thing we're going to change. The dip, that's kind of in the middle. You basically want it in the correct range, but like I was saying a few minutes ago, the pianist isn't going to object if it's within the range, but slightly different, as long as the aftertouch is correct. And then blow, all bets are off. That's the sacrificial lamb in order to make everything else work.